So next up, we have Jeff. I've known Jeff for a really long time. I'm going to steal his thunder. We've been talking a lot about finance, and Jeff likes to refer to himself as a recovering CFO, and he is going. Sorry, I stole your joke. He's going to talk to us today about actually. I don't know. He's going to talk to us a little bit about where's LYTIQs. Like, how did you become LYTIQs, formerly HCMI? So CEO and founder, and talk to us a little bit about quantifying work performance in terms of financial business results. So, thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Michael. I've known Michael for years, and yes, I love the conversations. I don't know if any of you were in the earlier session. On the other side, or actually one of these last sessions with Dat talking about ROI. So that's really my thing. So bear with me for just a minute. I'll give you the brief intro. We'll do the crawl, walk, run. I apologize up front. Did not adhere 100% to the slide font size requirements, but should be plenty big for everybody to read. Because in one of the case studies, I want to give you a little bit more detail and actually show a few metrics. So yes, I am a recovering CFO. I had a whole career in accounting and finance, thought that was the be-all, end-all of the world. I knew how to work really well with HR, which meant I said no to anything you asked for, but with a smile on my face. Why? Because what was HR not good at? Building a business case or showing an ROI. So they'd come in with a great imperative. But that's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. What do you bring to finance? A story? No, numbers. In particular, an ROI or a proposed ROI if you haven't done the project yet. Also, a couple of quick things in terms of background. Have done a lot of work around. I teach part-time at USC. Have donated more than 10 years of my time to ISO, the International Organization for Standards. We're actually trying to build what I would call gap accounting for HR. How do you standardize and classify all the definitions around HR, like what is workforce planning, what is people analytics, other kinds of, what is core data, what is other kind of data. So really trying to create that set of standards for HR to have, because that's, you've heard a lot about garbage in, garbage out. That's a real foundational problem. And also was a participant, proud, I guess, architect of a standard called ISO 30414, which is how to measure the workforce. Yes, shout out, have a fellow ISO colleague here. We're actually working to revise that standard and expand the metrics that are available in it. ISO is a nonprofit, so if you ever wanted to get where are some global standards I can use around how to measure and report workforce, that's a great standard. It costs you about $125 to download it online. So pretty easy to get. Lots of other things I can talk about. But we'll start quickly. And most of you, I'm preaching to the choir, you already know this. The foundation or the definition of value has changed dramatically from, if you go way back, most organizations' value is what's called tangible assets. And again, by the way, this is part of me paying penance for all of the evil sins I committed as a CFO to HR in the past. So once I crossed to HR, I really had my eyes opened to the other side of the world. I don't have a time machine. I can't go back and change it. So I have to try to pay for that by helping organizations make much better decisions about their data today. So foundationally or fundamentally, most of the value that's created in the market value of companies today is intangible value. It doesn't show up on the balance sheet or the P&L really. By the way, most CEOs would say, and some of you may have heard this one before, most CEOs would say our people are most valuable asset, right? Right? Of course. Who wouldn't say that? But where are they on the balance sheet? Expense. Right. There's not a dollar of asset on a balance sheet for people. So they say it, and then once the mic turns off, they're like, how are we on that headcount reduction? Oh yeah. Why? Because accounting, again, me in my prior life is like, we got to cut costs. We got to hit our numbers. Expenses are too high. What are people? An expense. So they are in financial statements, but they're in the expense side as a negative. Is it any wonder that financial people like me are always trying to minimize the cost of workforce and the size of workforce? It's because accounting rewards that. They don't have a measure. There is no measure for the positive side of people. By the way, I'm going to show you at least one or two positive measures for the value contribution that people can bring. So that's changed. And back when the rules were different, in the 70s and 80s, maybe that was okay. But now most of the market value companies is intangible. which I would argue is actually related to people. It's either built on intangible, it's process, it's service, it's brand, it's all kinds of things that are either directly from the current people there or those who were there before. So, and I actually heard this come up in just a couple of sessions ago. How do we get, what was it Ali said? HR and finance speak French and German. So that is true. I would jokingly say I speak 2 languages because I actually was a CHRO and a CFO. Well, so how do we get them to communicate better together? So I'm going to do this one quickly so we can get through the rest of the slides. I have a reward at the end, which is a couple bonus slides if we can get there. HR, they see people as numbers. We're talking about finance, by the way. Training is critical to our business. Talent is key to long-term success. We need to invest in talent. Yes. But what could finance possibly say to that? Okay, some of you heard that. Well, warm and fuzzy doesn't pay the bills. Training, it is critical business. Talent is key to long-term success. And yeah, we do need to invest in the business, but how much? HR, you can't give me an ROI of my training spend. By the way, I always knew when there was a budget gap at the end of the budget process where I could go to find that extra few million I need to get the budget to match what the board and the CEO wanted. Somebody's already laughing. You know where I went. My friends in HR. And I go say, oh, that pot of money we have for training, what's the ROI on that? Oh, well, it's huge. It saves turnover. Oh, what's the cost of turnover? And they throw out some outrageous number. Oh, it's 2 times annual salary. I go, wait a minute. We have like 15% annual turnover. We should be bankrupt. We're not. We're profitable. I'm going to throw a big disbelief on the number you just throw on me. I'll take 10% of your training budget, please. I'm sure you can do just as much with 90% of your training budget. Now you know why I have sins to pay for from the past. So I did that a few too many times. But there's actually more in common than you might think. So they know that people are valuable, but what they don't know is how to measure or value them appropriately. Have definitely seen finance turn it 180 degrees because they're so data driven. If you give them the right data, the right numbers, and the right business case, they will literally go from, I'm not sure, we can trust your data and HR to where have you been all my life? And can you bring me more? So you can get a tremendous turnaround from, now that, by the way, that's not all finance people. You may have a few there that if it's not a GAAP accounting, we're never going to look at it. But there are a lot of open-minded accounting and finance people out there. So how do we get there? So I'm going to just cut to the chase. You can take the freeway, which is full of traffic. And by the way, New York's a great example, right? Don't get on the road at certain times. Or you can take the detour. By the way, we take our human capital metrics in the different functional areas, and we link them to something in business, operational, like cycle time, like units produced. Like I actually heard previously, kilowatt hours produced. So whatever's a core metric or two in your business, or even better, perhaps customer satisfaction. I'm going to show you a case study here in just a minute. If we can link to one of those two, those probably have already been linked to financials, and accounting and finance understands the relationship between customer, business operations, and financials. What they don't understand is the human capital to financials. By the way, there's a quick way across. Anyone know what it is? The shortcut? What's in public financial statements that you can just get like that? Revenue, profit, head count. Wow, let me do the math. Average revenue per employee and profit per employee. Problem is that assumes everyone delivers value equally, and we know they don't. And by the way, and it also excludes something that many of you probably deal with every day. It's this thing you've probably heard of. It's called contingent workforce. Great way to cheat, by the way. I know CFOs who are like, okay, let's make more. You wonder why they're trying to drive more contingent workforce, because then they don't have to report them as headcount. They can bury them somewhere else. The cost didn't go anywhere, but now they look more productive. I know a company, and by the way, a few people have presented from them. Their favorite color is blue, and they have 3 letters in their name that starts with an I, that did that and actually advertised that for a few years. Now, that was years ago, so no blame being attributed to the current incumbents or people who recently have come from there. So how else can we get there? Well, by the way, we have to know which metrics link to business, and I'm going to do that one next. What's our workforce productivity? How do we rank? That's that positive side. How can we measure value contribution to people? Is it better to build, buy, or rent talent? By the way, the point of this one, because when I teach at USA, I actually give them a little bit of story around how to build that business case. There's 6 elements to that. If you want to hear more, because I can't give the whole masterclass in 15 to 20 minutes, I encourage you to come by our booth and I'll talk more about it. But you see, asking the right questions can go a long way, because like a rock in the shoe, it irritates management if they don't have the answer to that question. So sometimes just plotting a great question can get you launched on a journey to do some advanced analytics. So what are 3 ways we can do all this? Well, one is we can throw a few traditional metrics up. We can pick a couple of advanced metrics. By the way, I'll throw 2 out there. They're way too small to read, so I'll tell you. Human capital ROI ratio, return on human capital investment. Those are workforce productivity metrics. There's a lot of data out there on them. There's some empirical evidence showing they link to stock price and market value, including research that we have done on that. So those are part of your positive value add contribution metrics that are universally applicable. They don't necessarily need an operational metric in your business to work. And you can also implement those with a methodology and benchmark. So, okay, here's what I would call one of the money slides. So if you want, what are some of the metrics that link to and help you drive human capital ROI? I like human capital ROI ratio because that shows the value for every dollar you, basically, nutshell, for every dollar you invest in the workforce, what is the business getting? And there's both a revenue or gross profit version and a profit version. So the revenue version is human capital ROI ratio. I like that one better because it's more sensitive to small changes. The profit version, profit is actually subject to many more things even than revenue, which is subject to a lot. So how do we impact that? Well, you can think of things like span of control, manager stability, and all kinds of other things. So these are all some great metrics that link to, and we actually have case studies. You heard some of the speakers talking before in terms of actually Cole earlier today. About that we need to, as a practice, as a community, do a better job of linking to ROI and showing business value. These are all metrics that we have in various case studies that link to. So what could you imagine that a former CFO would do when I do a project? We always go find ROI. Otherwise, why start? Not to say every project is going to have a big ROI. DE&I may not have any ROI. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do for the business. All right, so these are some examples of the kinds of ROI you can get. By no means is it an exhaustive list. I'm going to show you JetBlue in just a moment. But you can see that the point of this is actually, there's like pots of gold buried in your yard. If you know how to find them, and many of you have that, you have the stats skills, you have the data wrangling, the analytics skills, and for the most part, you have access to the data to do this work. You just need to get out, as I would say, use a sport analogy, over the goal line to show some kind of ROI. Because I can tell you for an absolute fact that if you come in with statistical analysis, even in a company full of engineers or scientists, they can ignore it. If you used a sampling technique, they'll probably throw it out. Why? Because they don't trust samples because they can be skewed. So they want you to test everybody. Well, but we have outliers or data that's wrong. So they'll find all these arguments why they don't have to necessarily accept your great statistical analysis. What we found is not only do you have to do stats, you have to do a financial ROI, which is to show what's your cost, which is usually the cost of your project or your intervention or a change that you want to make, with a benefit. And there's a secret, which I don't show in here, but is in some of the articles that I've written on how to link HR and finance together. By the way, don't just do one ROI. As a CFO, my job, whenever anyone came to me with a project with a net present value or a projection for the future, was to not like the number. Yeah, I'm supposed to hate the number. In fact, I had a president of a very large, in fact, they're here today. I used to work for them years ago, a very large multinational pharmaceutical company who liked to be the good cop, which meant when somebody put up a presentation for money they wanted, whether it was R&D or manufacturing or, heaven forbid, HR, they're asking for money, they'd say, oh, Jeff, how do you feel about this presentation? That was like code for, Jeff, tear them up. And I hate these numbers. And even if I didn't want to be bad cop, I had to. So by the way, that might be why some of your finance people are difficult to work with, because they're pushed to do that. So how do you get around it? Don't come in with one number in terms of a forecast, ROI, or projection. Come in with 2. A high, an optimistic, and a pessimistic. And so you want to hear your accounting people start to stutter, come in with 2 numbers, and then say, oh, here's my ROI projection. Here's the optimistic business case or scenario. Here's the pessimistic business case or scenario. Well, that optimistic is outrageous. What's the right one? Well, let's split the difference. We'll go in the middle. Even the low one, it cost of turnover, that's actually a material number. That's, by the way, materiality is a great concept they'll get too. That's a significant finding. That's anywhere from 1 to 10% of total labor cost. How can we ignore that? So you can actually win. And by the way, anything in between the high and the low, if your ultimate outcome is anywhere in between, you're a genius. If you're close to the high, you're brilliant. If you're close to the low, you're fantastic. If you're above the high, you're amazing. The only way you lose is if you're below the minimum. Now, you can't do like $0 to $10 billion. You can't make it that wide. They'll say, what's the statistical basis in that? Oh, nothing. I just want to make sure I can't lose. So you got to narrow it down a little bit, but any reasonable numbers, you really improve your chances of winning the argument. By the way, that's what finance does. That's what I used to use for M&A, hundreds of millions of dollars, even billion-dollar acquisitions. Nobody knows what's going to happen. How do they make the decision to go forward? These scenario forecasts. And we would never go with one, we'd go with a few. Management would get comfortable with what's the range of expectations of what might happen, and they'll make a decision. So the business is used to that sort of thing, and here's some of the ROIs you can get from little pots of gold and different things. And we talk a lot about attrition, but you can also predict sales stars before you hire them. You can improve productivity. That was actually the biggest one we ever found. By the way, that was the ROI of leadership. How much does a great leader make? 15%. 15% of what? 15% productivity gain at no marginal cost. That's awesome. And then I'm actually going to show you the next one, JetBlue. So we've got just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we have a couple minutes for questions. So I'm going to fly through this quickly. Apologies up front. Basically, anyone familiar with JetBlue, you fly JetBlue, they're based out here in New York, so I hope you are familiar with them in some way. I don't know that they invented, but they were one of the earliest companies to go with something called Employee Net Promoter Score, or ENPS. They used NPS for their customers all the time. They're a great airline. Lots of good data on them. So the Net Promoter Score, for those of you who are not familiar, is basically a 0 to 10 score. If you get a 9 or a 10, you're promoted. That means you're just absolutely delighted by the service. If you're a 7 or 8, you'll notice it's not in there. They throw it out. That's actually considered neutral. 7 or 8, wow, that's a tough score. That's a tough hill to climb. And 0 through 6 is considered bad. So it's very hard to get a score above, say, 20 or 25% on this, because you've got to have an awful lot of 9s and 10s and not very many 0 through 6s. And their question was, by the way, it's a single question survey. How likely are you to recommend JetBlue as a good place to work? They discovered that it links to performance, all of the things equal, weather conditions, maintenance conditions, flight load. Same flight sometimes would have a lot of Net Promoter customers coming off. Other times it have very few. What they found out, and you'll go, well, that's obvious. How could they not know? But they didn't know, I assure you, was that Net Promoter employees were creating these great experiences for the customers and the passengers, who then became Net Promoters, which is worth thousands of dollars to the airline. So how do we dollarize that? Okay, let's get right to the money. ENPS equals Customer Net Promoter Score equals loyalty equals revenue. Well, how much? Now, to be fair, because I know we got a lot of stats experts here, the R squared was not huge, because trying to predict from employee engagement and Net Promoter Score to revenue is a tough call. But we had a few percentage points, and it was statistically significant. And this was the linkage model that you came up with. ENPS, if that goes up 5%, employee engagement goes up similar. And I'm looking at in-flight crew members, which is the middle one. Discretionary effort goes up 10%, adverse events like accidents, other things like that. And ultimately, you get a whole 1% increase in revenue. Well, that's not very much. Well, actually, back when this project happened a while back, it was $26 to $96 million. Remember when I said a range? Well, okay, finance is not going to laugh at $26 to $96 million. And boy, can I get a budget for $500,000 to go find, recruit, and train some more Net Promoter employees? As a former CFO, it's like, yeah, I think we can find the money for you for that, because the ROI on that is massive. In fact, we commonly see 10 to 1. For every dollar you invest in analytics, you can often get $10 back in ROI. And I can assure you, business can't find that in many other places. All right. And the last thing is, where do those Net Promoters come from? Managers. So I'm tight on time. Want to make sure we have at least a moment for questions. Basically, if the manager's a Net Promoter, there's a lot more Net Promoter employees. Again, shock and surprise. Employees highly engaged, so are the employees. Wow, blinding flash of the obvious. But if you don't have data, you never really know. And if the manager is detracted or they're checked out, then it negatively affects the workforce that reports to them. All right. Sorry, I didn't have time for the bonus slides, but I'm happy to share them, and you should be able to get them in the download. Questions?
Doesn't the HR ROI really need a capital charge, that you're attributing all operating profit to employees regardless of the level of capital investment in the company?
The question is, if you're going to do an ROI, basically human capital ROI calculation, shouldn't you charge like an interest rate charge a cost of capital charge to that to go into your calculation? You sure could. I could tell you that wouldn't change finance's mind really. It would make it more technically correct, but it would not be ultimately material to the ROI calculation.
Sorry, Steve. And the reason is because usually the capital charge, which is the weighted average cost of capital for the organization, often is in the single digits, maybe the high or the low double digits.
Another finance person here.
And typically an ROI on an HR initiative is in the hundreds to the thousands percents. So even if you did charge a cost of capital, it's not going to move the magnitude of the ROI on an HR, a well-designed HR investment. And you're right, it should be in there. But I think intuitively, CFOs will look at the ROI and automatically adjust for a weighted average cost of capital charge.
I'll translate all that. If the ROI is big enough, they'll give you a pass on the cost of capital charge.
Awesome. I think we're at time. Yeah, so we need to wrap up and make a little bit of window between now and our panel. So I said thank you, everyone, to Jeff. Thank you very much.